Hey, what's going on, guys? We're back here. It's Monday. It's me and Jack, and we're back with your Freshwater Monday. Now, today we're going to talk about line. Different types of line that you can use. Where to use them, like techniques and whatnot. Areas, I guess, also involved in that. And just a couple of tips on each kind of line. So we'll start with the most simple one that everybody knows. We all grew up like fishing with it, which is monofilament line.
Yep.
So let's talk a little bit about monofilament.
Gotcha. So mono is going to be most of the time either clear, it could have some little tint to it, but mainly with mono, the biggest thing is you're going to get that stretch, and it's going to float a lot too. So pretty much the only time I use mono is when I'm fishing topwater baits. And
Exactly.
It's going to be a lot stiffer too than braid. So when you're fishing those topwater baits with treble hooks, sometimes it tends to kind of roll on itself and you'll catch that front treble with braid. Whereas with mono, the stiffness keeps your bait kind of in line and working right.
Right, and other than that, the abrasion resistance on that could be pretty good at times.
Definitely.
So monofilament, basic kind of entry point line. Some people love it, some people hate it. Like Jack said, I agree 100%, where if I'm still using monofilament for certain things, it primarily is just topwater. Now, all the lines have evolved and done so many things over the years where this is where we're going to get into the fluorocarbon and what it's for and the benefits of it, etc. Now, we're going to talk to you guys about fluorocarbon here. And that's one of the biggest things in the past few years, I will say 10, 12 years, where it's been, that's become more involved for certain techniques and really essential for most of our fishery here that we're fishing, whether it's freshwater or saltwater. It's become a staple line to use around the world, literally, for any technique specific stuff too. So with freshwater, we tend to utilize that, and I will say we do use full spools of fluorocarbon. Not necessarily fully, but we do use X amount of yards for certain specific techniques. I personally like to use some. I use fluorocarbon specifically when I'm cranking. Whenever I'm throwing crankbaits and all of that, I feel uncomfortable if I'm not using fluorocarbon. For our region here in Maryland, we have all those reservoirs. That is the closest things we have to actual big lakes like you fish down south, where we're fishing ledges, we're fishing rocks, and a lot of those things, you want to crank down on those rocks. And with that clear water, especially in the early spring and continuing into the fall and winter, that's essential, especially with some of those high pressure, reservoirs that we have here. The biggest thing why I like to use fluoro also, as a benefit to it, is I can actually downsize my fluoro size, make that long cast, and if I'm using, let's say, a 4-foot diving square bill, I can actually make it run closer to 6. Why? Because the line is denser, has a little bit of stretch, not as much as mono. The sensitivity is there, visibility, they can't really see it. And once again, it's helping me sink down that bait. So what other techniques will you use fluorocarbon for?
So fluorocarbon, pretty much all my chatterbaits, jigs, crankbaits, like you said, spinner baits, any kind of Texas rig, anything like that, I'm using fluorocarbon as my main line. Really good abrasion resistance. I'll flip bushes with it, no problem. Lots of stuff like that. And that little bit of stretch will help you out with those reaction baits like the chatterbaits, rattle traps, crankbaits, things like that. You're not pulling the hooks out of the fish's mouth, which is huge.
The one thing I personally noticed with fluorocarbon, especially with either doing obviously a full amount of line on your spools, is for our local region here, it's for pickerel fishing. I know a lot of guys are getting more and more into the pickerel fishing during the fall and winter. And remember, guys, that water and most of these creeks around the area, especially in the winter, will get super clear. I've actually fished next to people that were using braided line next to me with a short leader, and we're fishing the same area, and I will definitely outfish them because I believe of that fluorocarbon. Whether it was that braid, fluorocarbon helping sink down the little jerkbait a little bit more, or just that they couldn't see that line. Because remember, pickerel will follow that bait a line. They will trail it and actually have a good amount of time to stare at it and look at it and analyze what's going on. So that's where you want to do that. Now, one of the things with fluorocarbon is obviously with spinning reels, it's a little different.
Yes.
Can you tell us a little more on that?
So fluorocarbon as a main line on a spinning reel is a lot harder to manage because of the little bit of memory that it holds as opposed to braid, which has next to no memory. So it'll tend to kind of jump off the spool. So what we do with spinning reels is we'll use like 10, 12, 15 pound braid as our main line and then tie a fluorocarbon leader on there.
Right. Or almost like a top shot too, where it's a little bit longer, right?
Yeah, so I'll usually do like 8 yards of fluorocarbon on mine, depending on water clarity too. But most of the time I'm reeling it into the spool, my leader. And then you also don't have to tie as often, which is really, really nice.
Exactly. Yeah, but fluorocarbon, once again, it's one of those things that for the fishery and the culture in our area, it's not like a huge thing.
Yeah.
But I just think people haven't fished it, haven't experienced it enough where it does give you those benefits. Of course, one of the downsides to it is the cost of fluorocarbon. Most really good fluorocarbon seems to be a little bit on the pricier side, but for me, it outweighs the actual,
I completely agree.
like, it buys me more bites, put it that way. Like, I'll get more bites, I'll get more fish, at least in my experience with that. Now, other than that, fluorocarbon itself, obviously you can use it as a leader. Most people will argue, what can I use, braid and then just do a leader to it. And that comes down to one of those things where, once again, if you're using this bright stuff and you do a short leader and you're in like a super high pressure area, super clear water, what's going to happen?
Fish are going to see it.
Yeah.
They're going to spook. Especially pressure is a big thing with that. The more pressure, the longer the leader, better your chances for catching fish.
Exactly, and that's one of those things, like, we're telling you guys this thing so it helps you catch more fish, in the long run, because obviously in this general area, we don't have that many freshwater spots, right?
Yeah.
So they do get hit pretty hard.
Very hard.
So you can actually witness and see this as you try it out there. So let's talk about braid now.
Yep.
I mean, that's obviously what everybody uses the most. So I guess take a little, turn on that.
Pretty much the only time other than spinning gear that I use braid as my main line is if I'm like punching mats, like heavy grass, frogging, throwing a swim jig, or if I'm fishing really, really shallow water that's pretty muddy. That's pretty much the only time I'll use braid as my main line. Usually a dark green works really well. But braid, you're gonna have no stretch. And this 4-strand is going to help cut through the grass pretty well too. So if you stick a fish like deep in a mat, you'll be able to get them out.
Yeah. And the other thing with that, guys, remember this, for, once again, general area here, just taking what you said, which is perfect for like snakehead fishing around here. You don't need to really run a leader, for example, black water. That water's murky. It's just the color of the water in general, where those fish are not going to be actually seeing that bait from a mile away. It's more of a reaction strike. So you don't really need to, but obviously I'm not saying everywhere in the state you won't need to. You got to adjust accordingly to your situational fishing. If you're fishing super clear water, then yes, of course, maybe run a leader on there. If you're fishing fast moving water in the stream for snakeheads, which we have that now, adjust to that. It's not going to be one of those things where you're going to use straight braid to it all the time. But other than that, with braid, like you just said, I would use it a lot if I'm going to be doing, I'm going for like a little more distance in an area where obviously there's a lot more structure to it. And with that, let's talk about leaders. You can do mono leader, you can do fluoro leader. It's really optional to, once again, based on what you're fishing. What would you use a fluorocarbon leader, Jack?
So for drop shots, shaky heads, stuff like that, really finesse stuff, wacky rigs, that's when I'm going to use a fluorocarbon leader on a spinning rod most of the time, tied to braid. But that's pretty much it for fluorocarbon leaders for me.
And the one thing I would like to tell you guys is there's no base rule on where you can actually go, you have to match the size. Like you can actually upsize and downsize. Of course, to an extent, because if you go super light, it might not be holding up on your connection knot as well. But typically, if I'm running this 10-pound, braided line, I can go up to 20, 30 pound. I can go down to 6-pound fluoro, so I can downsize and adjust accordingly to whatever situation I'm doing. Now, the only time I will run a actual monofilament leader on there, sometimes it's if I'm fishing, you know, once again, you wouldn't really need to, but top water stuff.
Yep.
And you need a little more stretch, right? Mm-hmm. That'll be kind of like the only situational time where I will do that. But either with that, for certain situations like snakehead fishing, I'll just go straight braid.
Exactly.
Because most of the time we're gonna need to cut through some heavy vegetation or something like that.
Mm-hmm. And for mono leaders also, if you're fishing like a big topwater, like spook, something like that, and you notice you're not getting the casting distance or the memory is kind of messing with you as you're casting those big spooks, you can get like 30-pound braid, even super slick, casts really, really well, and just tie like, I don't know, a foot of mono leader in front of it just so your hooks don't get tangled up. And you get a little bit of stretch too.
Exactly. That's the biggest thing. Like you said, I do that actually a lot for striper fishing.
Yep.
Around here when you're in the fall with topwaters. Most people ask me, why do you run a mono leader? And that's exactly that point.
Yep.
Keep those hooks you know, from tangling up with the line itself. Mm-hmm. So I think we cover everything, guys, for the line. Obviously, where to use some techniques and whatnot. So come back next Monday and check out what we talk about next week about freshwater. Have a good one.